They found his teeth before they found his name. Buried in a shallow grave by the Harlem River, all that remained was a rotted jawbone, shattered by a .38 slug. The blood was already washed away by spring rain, but the violence still clung to the mud like a warning. Jimmy Coonan didn't just kill, he made people disappear. In the early 70s, Hell's Kitchen was a hunting ground, and Jimmy, barely 25, was the one-man even killers feared. The Irish mob wasn't ruled by bloodlines anymore. It bowed to brutality. That morning, the NYPD pulled up a corpse with no hands, no feet, and a hole where a face shoved been. An execution, textbook clean, except for the note under the tongue. Family means nothing. Jimmy had signed it without ink. This wasn't vengeance. This was theater. And the show had only just begun. Before he became a ghost maker, Jimmy was just a boy from West 48th Street. Irish Catholic, quick fists, quicker temper. He wasn't born into crime, he was carved into it. His old man, Jackie Coonan, ran the rackets for a while. Beat his wife. Terrorized Jimmy. Said the only god in Hell's Kitchen was fear. And Jimmy? He listened. He learned. By 15, he was shaking down school kids for lunch money and robbing candy stores for kicks. But there was one night, one blood-soaked winter night, when everything broke. Jackie came home drunk and screaming. Jimmy didn't run. He grabbed a bat. That was the first time he spilled blood. Not the last. Some say he smiled when the bones cracked. Some say he cried. But everyone agrees. Something left his eyes that night and never came back. They called him Jimmy the Gent because he wore suits and never yelled. But behind that smooth voice and clean shave was a monster stitched from trauma. By 19, he was running numbers for the Westies, and no one dared cross him. He didn't threaten. He didn't scream. He just looked you in the eye and said your name slowly, like a priest reading last rites. The Irish mob wasn't glamorous. It was dirty, loud, blood-soaked. But Jimmy, he brought style to slaughter. He once wore a white blazer to a funeral of a guy he had killed. The cops suspected, but fear kept them silent. Jimmy had mastered the game. Be polite, be efficient, and always be the last face they see. The first contract hit Jimmy took wasn't for money, it was for pride. A guy named Sullivan had bad-mouthed the Westies, thought they were too soft. So, Jimmy took it personal. No orders. No backup. Just him, a straight razor, and a promise. He waited in the bathroom of a dive bar for 3 hours, quiet as a ghost. When Sullivan walked in whistling, Jimmy stepped out of the stall and smiled. He didn't speak. He just slashed. Arteries sprayed across the tiles. It wasn't clean. It wasn't quick. But it was personal. Afterward, Jimmy washed his hands, fixed his tie, and walked back through the bar like nothing happened. That's when the crew knew. He wasn't just loyal. He was lethal. Jimmy didn't rise through the ranks, he burned through them. Every man above him either retired, vanished, or ended up face down in the Hudson. By age 25, Jimmy wasn't just feared, he was myth. Street kids told tales of him slicing off ears and mailing them to debtors. Old mob bosses stopped saying his name out loud. They just whispered, "The ghost in the leather coat." But Jimmy wasn't supernatural. He was surgical. Cold, calculated. He read people like open books, then ripped out their final chapter. And when he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a killer. He saw a survivor. That's what made him dangerous. He believed every body he dropped was just another step towards safety. Jimmy wasn't born heartless. Somewhere deep under the rage and the wreckage, there was still that boy who used to watch old gangster flicks with his mom. Her name was Eileen, soft-spoken, broken-eyed, and always bruised. She sang Irish lullabies to drown out the sound of Jackie's fists. She told Jimmy he was smart, too smart for this place. But that hope died with her. Pneumonia, 1973. She coughed blood for weeks, while Jimmy was running errands for the crew. He missed her last breath. By the time he got there, her body was cold and still clutching a rosary. Jimmy didn't cry at the funeral. Didn't say a word. Just stared at the casket like it had betrayed him. From that day on, he stopped praying and started killing with purpose. Everyone thought Jackie Coonan would die in prison, but the devil has a way of surviving. In '74, parole boards bought his lies. He walked out grinning like he still ran the block. Jimmy heard the news while counting money in a backroom poker den. He didn't flinch, just folded the bills and whispered, "Then it's time." He hadn't seen his father in nearly a decade, but the scars still itched. Jackie didn't just beat Jimmy. He shaped him like a sculptor with a sledgehammer. And now the artist was back, demanding tribute. Within a week, Jackie showed up in Hell's Kitchen, asking for a cut. Jimmy offered him a drink. No threats. No shouting. Just a cold smile and a quiet, "You don't belong here anymore." Jackie laughed. "I built this street, boy." Jimmy whispered, "Then you should have stayed buried in it." The crew didn't like it. Blood was blood, even if it spilled. But Jimmy had made up his mind. He called in Eddie Nails Flannery, a quiet soldier with dead eyes and a love for clean exits. "I want him gone," Jimmy said, voice flat. "Make it look like cancer finally caught him." Eddie hesitated. "It's your father." Jimmy's eyes narrowed. "He was my curse." The plan was simple. Jackie would be picked up for a meeting that didn't exist, driven out past Flushing, given a shot of pure fentanyl in his bourbon, and left in a tenement stairwell. But Jackie was sharper than they thought. He made Eddie. A struggle broke out. One stairwell. One gunshot. One dead silence. When Jimmy got the call, he didn't blink. He just muttered, "Should have done it myself." Rumors spread fast in the underworld. Faster than truth. Some said Jimmy had killed his own blood. Others whispered Jackie had faked his death to disappear again. But in the back rooms of Hell's Kitchen, no one dared say it out loud. Jimmy's silence spoke louder than confessions. He didn't deny it, didn't defend it. He just lit his smokes and kept collecting debts. But there were cracks in his armor. Late nights at the bar, staring into nothing. The way he touched his mother's rosary when he thought no one watched. One night, Big Pete asked, "You all right, Jimmy?" Jimmy said, "I sleep fine." Pete nodded, then said, "So why do you smell like ghosts?" Jimmy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's when the crew knew he wasn't haunted by what he did. He was haunted by what he hadn't finished. By now, Jimmy had no past, only bodies and rumors. He lived in whispers. Cops wanted him. Rivals feared him. But power isn't peace. One cold morning, Jimmy walked into his mother's old church. No guards. No gun. Just the silence of stained glass and echoing footsteps. He sat in the last pew, eyes locked on the altar. "I didn't mean to become this," he whispered. But even the angels stayed silent. In the end, Jimmy wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was warning God. Because Jimmy knew what came next. He could feel it in his bones. The blood wasn't done spilling. And family? That word was dead long before Jackie hit the floor. Jimmy rose, crossed himself out of habit, and walked back into the storm. Jimmy didn't trust anyone, but that didn't mean he worked alone. His crew was lean, loyal, and lethal. They weren't gangsters. They were executioners. Nails, Big Pete, Mikey the Shrink. Each had a role. Each had a weakness. And Jimmy, he held the leash. But power breeds cracks. One job in Brooklyn turned sour. A drop gone wrong. Mikey panicked, pulled the trigger too early, and turned a clean hit into a war. The Colombians lost a nephew. Retaliation came fast. Bullets through windows, cars rigged with wires. Jimmy gathered his men under flickering basement lights. "No more mistakes," he said. Next one who fumbles gets the same send-off I gave my father. No one spoke. Not even Pete. Because they knew he meant it. The streets weren't scared of Jimmy anymore. They were scared of everyone. Every bar in Hell's Kitchen buzzed with paranoia. Allies vanished. Bodies piled up. One night, a young runner named Benny got shot just delivering envelopes. Wrong place. Wrong time. His blood soaked the stoop of St. Matthew's. Jimmy showed up minutes later, knelt beside the kid's corpse, and didn't move for an hour. Cops watched from across the street. No one dared interrupt. Jimmy finally stood, eyes hollow, and whispered, "They want blood? I'll give them rivers." That week alone, 5 Colombians went missing. One was found inside a butcher shop freezer, his tongue nailed to a pig's head. Jimmy had declared war, and war listened. Cops started kicking in doors, desperate to contain the fire. But Jimmy wasn't sloppy. He kept no records, no traces. What he couldn't erase, he buried. Then IPD dragged in nails, tried to turn him. Offered him protection, cash, even a new name. Nails stared at them and laughed. "I already got a name," he said, "and he doesn't like rats." Jimmy's reputation had mutated. He wasn't just feared, he was untouchable. Even the detectives had rules about approaching him. No lone cars, no late nights, and never, ever say his name near a recorder. But the law has limits, and Hell's Kitchen was starting to boil. Behind every knock was a badge, and behind every badge was a man waiting to die. Loyalty started leaking. Mikey the Shrink had been quiet, too quiet. Jimmy caught him sneaking into Chinatown twice with cash bags. Side work, Mikey claimed. But Jimmy didn't believe in side work. He followed him one night. Saw the deal. Saw the betrayal. Chinatown thugs, a handshake, a smile. That was enough. Jimmy waited outside the alley. When Mikey came out, Jimmy stepped from the shadows. "You should have told me," he said calmly. Mikey stammered. "It wasn't like that." But Jimmy raised the pistol before he could finish. "You lied with your hands, Mikey. One shot. Cleaned up. Point blank." Loyalty wasn't optional, it was absolute. The crew found the body the next day. Eyes opened, one each gat, mouth shut. By fall of '75, Jimmy wasn't running from war, he was driving it. Street corners were claimed like battlefields. Businesses burned. Widows wept. But Jimmy kept smiling. "Fear," he told Big Pete, "is the most honest currency." Yet even he felt the pressure. His name was in headlines now. Feds circled like vultures. One night, while hiding in a Brooklyn flophouse, Jimmy stared out the window at a city on fire. Riots, sirens, screams. He lit a cigarette and muttered, "I didn't start this." Behind him, Pete said, "But you sure as hell own it." That was the moment Jimmy realized there was no getting out. He had killed the past, and the future had started bleeding. The only thing left to do was finish the war he began. It started with a whisper, then a wiretap. A rat in the crew, feeding the feds names, dates, bodies. Jimmy didn't panic. Rats get eaten. But what shook him was the source. Frankie Coonan. His own brother. Dead. Quiet. Clean. College educated. Jimmy thought Frankie stayed out of it. Turns out he was in deeper than anyone, wearing a mic under his priest collar. Frankie had gone to the feds months ago, traded information for immunity. Jimmy found out from an inside man at the DA office. He didn't say a word. Didn't explode. Just poured a drink, stared at the glass and whispered, "He was the only blood I hadn't buried." That night, Jimmy walked to St. Joseph's Parish. Rain falling. Confession light on. No, new. He didn't go in. He stood outside for an hour, then vanished into the dark. Jimmy confronted Frankie 2 days later. No guns, no crew, just brothers. The meeting took place in their mother's old apartment, now empty, dust clinging to the wallpaper like memory. You told them, Jimmy said. Frankie looked tired, like he hadn't slept in months. They were going to kill me, he said. You were going to kill yourself. Jimmy lit a cigarette, the smoke curling between them. You think I wanted this, he said. I gave you peace, I gave you distance. Frankie whispered, you gave me nightmares. Silence stretched. Finally, Jimmy said, I'm not going to kill you. Frankie exhaled. Then Jimmy added, that would be too kind. He left without another word. But something inside him stayed behind. Something broken. Word got out fast. The crew was shaken. Some wanted Frankie dead. Others thought Jimmy had gone soft. Big Pete said it straight. If blood's not sacred, what is? Jimmy looked at him and said, nothing. That's the point. Trust cracked. Deals slipped. An Italian capo pulled out of a gun run. A safe house got torched. Jimmy sat alone at the bar, reading the paper. Front page, Coonan brothers split in mob ranks. He sipped his whiskey and muttered, they think this is the end. Then he folded the paper, tossed a 50 on the counter, and walked out. He wasn't broken. He was focused. Frankie's betrayal didn't end Jimmy's empire. It redefined it. The feds moved in faster now, emboldened. Frankie's intel had cracked half the Westie's safe houses. Raids swept through the city like storms. Jimmy dodged all of it. But the noose was tightening. One night, during a deal in the Bronx, sirens cut the silence. Jimmy bolted through alleyways, ducking bullets, breath sharp in the cold. He made it out, but just barely. In a safe house that night, bloodied and shaking, he looked in the mirror. His reflection was a ghost, pale, blood-stained, lost. He whispered, Frankie started this. I'll end it. The line between business and vengeance had vanished. There were no rules now. No mercy. Just survival. Jimmy sent a message. Not through bullets, but through silence. The crew found a body hung upside down under the 11th Avenue overpass. Not dead. Not bleeding. Just gagged. Frankie's confession tape stuffed into his shirt pocket. The man was a courier for the Italians. He'd flipped too. It was a statement. Jimmy knew everything. And he was done forgiving. The city got the message. No more back channels. No more whispers. From now on, anyone who crossed him would bleed in daylight. Even the law flinched. Cops backed off. Reporters stayed quiet. And Jimmy, he stood on a rooftop that night, looking out at Hell's Kitchen. Lit a cigarette. Smiled. War had rules. Jimmy had none. Jimmy didn't knock on Frankie's door, he kicked it in. The priest collar didn't protect him now. The apartment was dark, save for a flickering TV casting ghostly shadows. Frankie stood from the couch, hands raised. I didn't mean for this, he said. Jimmy leveled the pistol but didn't fire. You meant for me to rot, Jimmy said. You handed me over like trash. Frankie stepped forward. You weren't coming back, Jimmy. You were already dead. The gun trembled slightly. For the first time in years, Jimmy looked unsure. You were all I had left. The silence was a scream. Then Jimmy turned and walked away. No bullets. Just footsteps. Frankie collapsed to the floor in tears. Mercy for once. But mercy had a cost. Jimmy had just spared the one man who could destroy him. The Italians saw weakness. Word had spread. Jimmy spared the rat. That made him vulnerable. A summit was called in Little Italy, terms to end the war. But Jimmy didn't negotiate. He arrived late, wearing black alone. No guards. No backup. Just rage. You sent bombs to my streets, he said to the table. Now you want peace. An elder capo replied, you've lost control. Sit down before you lose your head. Jimmy smiled coldly, pulled a .38 from under the table, and fired. 2 capos dropped before anyone moved. Chaos exploded. Blood on the walls. Plates shattering. Jimmy dove through the window, landing hard on concrete below. Bleeding, but alive. There would be no peace. Not now. Not ever. Jimmy vanished for days. Some thought he was dead. Others prayed he was. But he re-emerged like a storm, limping, stitched and seething. The safe houses were empty. His crew scattered. Big Pete was gone. Rumor said he flipped, traded Jimmy for a deal. Jimmy tracked him to a Jersey motel, alone, waiting for witness protection. Jimmy didn't kick the door. He picked the lock. Pete looked up from the bed and sighed. "I figured you'd find me." Jimmy didn't reply. He walked over, sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out a flask and took a swig. Then he handed it to Pete. "Drink," he said. Pete hesitated, then took a sip. Jimmy stood, walked to the door and muttered, "Don't finish it." Pete died 10 minutes later. The whiskey was poisoned. Jimmy returned to the city like a specter. His empire in ruins, his enemies multiplying. But he wasn't done. He wanted them all to feel it. The guilt. The silence. The fear. He torched a nightclub. The Colombians ran. Left the bouncer tied to a chair inside, mouth stuffed with his own paychecks. He gunned down a courier mid-traffic, then disappeared before the body hit the pavement. The city bled. Newspapers screamed. One reporter called him the Irish Reaper. The name stuck. Jimmy had no crew now, just shadows, rumors, and the memory of everyone he'd buried. This wasn't a reign anymore. It was a reckoning. And he wasn't doing it for power. He was doing it for closure. Whatever that meant. It all came full circle at his father's grave. Years after the killing. After the war. After the betrayals. Jimmy stood over the cracked headstone, bottle in hand, rain falling in sheets. "You were a bastard," he said. "But you built me." Lightning cracked overhead. He poured whiskey on the grave. "I buried every piece of you in me. And still you're here." Behind him, a shadow moved. A gun cocked. Jimmy didn't flinch. He turned slowly. "If it's you, Frankie," he said, "do it clean." But it wasn't Frankie. It was someone else. A young kid. Wet, shaking, eyes wide. Jimmy stared, then whispered, "You want to be me?" The kid nodded. Jimmy stepped forward, handed him the gun, and walked away into the storm. That was Jimmy's legacy, not bullets. Echoes. Jimmy disappeared after that night, in the graveyard. No calls. No sightings. Just silence. The city kept moving, faster, louder, but Hell's Kitchen felt colder. Some said he went to Boston. Others said South America. But no one knew for sure. One old bartender swore Jimmy came in once, bought a drink, and sat in the corner for hours, watching, not speaking. Then he left his coat on the chair and never came back. They found nothing in the pockets except a single playing card. The King of Spades. The message was clear. The king was dead. Or maybe he just changed his face. In the streets he ruled, his name faded into myth. But the silence he left behind? That echoed louder than any gunshot. Frankie moved upstate, took over a small parish no one cared about. He preached about redemption, but he knew there was no absolution. Not for the things he'd done. Not for the blood he'd helped spill. Every Sunday he stood at the pulpit, eyes scanning empty pews, waiting for a shadow that never came. Once he thought he saw Jimmy in the back, watching. But it was just the wind moving the curtain. At night, Frankie prayed. But it wasn't to God. It was to memory. He kept a photo of them as boys, 2 kids on a stoop, all teeth and bruises. Sometimes he looked at it and whispered, "I'm sorry." But the photo never answered. And neither did the silence. In the underworld, Jimmy became a legend. New crews used his name like a ghost story. "Don't cross me or you'll end up like Coonan's enemies." The young bloods didn't believe half of it. They thought he was just a tale. But the old ones knew better. They remembered the way the streets emptied when he was angry. The way cops crossed the street to avoid him. One night, a kid tagged a wall in Midtown. "Jimmy lives." It lasted 3 days before someone painted over it. But those 3 days? Every paperboy, every cop, every ex-hitman took a second glance. Because maybe, just maybe, he was watching. Maybe he never left. Maybe the king was just wearing someone else's face. Big Pete's funeral came and went. No one cried. No one showed, except a city clerk and a retired cop who kept checking his watch. Jimmy didn't show, but someone left flowers. Lilies. No card. No name. Just a single bullet resting beside the bouquet. It became the photo every newspaper used. They called it a symbol, a warning, a goodbye. But to those who understood Jimmy, it was something else. It was closure. Not for the world. For himself. He had lost everything. His mother, his brother, his crew, his soul. All that remained was the silence. And in that silence, he found something close to peace. Not freedom. Not forgiveness. But quiet. And for a man like Jimmy, that was enough. Years later, an old man was arrested in Argentina for running guns to mercenaries. No ID, no prints, just scars. The American agents thought he looked familiar. One whispered, "Could be him." But when they showed a photo to Frankie, he shook his head. That man's been dead a long time. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. Jimmy Coonan was no longer a man. He was a myth. A story fathers told sons when loyalty mattered. A name that tasted like whiskey and gunpowder. Michelle. No grave. No obituary. Just smoke. And maybe that was the point. Because in the end, Jimmy didn't want legacy. He wanted silence. And he got it. There's no retirement plan for ghosts. There's a file buried in a basement archive beneath one police plaza. Dusty. Unlabeled. Inside, yellowed photos, redacted transcripts, and a sketch of a man with cold eyes. No fingerprints. No death certificate. Just 3 words scrawled in pencil. Too late now. The rookie detective assigned to the case once asked, why wasn't he ever caught? The answer came from a retired captain who'd seen too much. Because by the time we understood who he really was, he said, he wasn't that man anymore. Jimmy didn't just escape justice. He outlived it. He became a story too dangerous to end. And in the precincts, when the lights dimmed, they still told his tale. Not to honor him. To remind themselves what happens when ghosts wear human skin. Years later, a documentary aired. The Ghost of Hell's Kitchen. It showed grainy footage, old interviews, blurred faces. But no one could say who Jimmy really was. A survivor? A psychopath? A protector? His myth had swallowed the man. In bars across New York, old-timers argued over drinks. Some swore he saved their neighborhood. Others blamed him for every funeral. One woman, Eileen's sister, spoke for the first time. Jimmy was just a boy, she said, voice cracking. Then the city got him. The camera lingered on her wrinkled hands holding a photo, Jimmy and his mother, smiling. For 1 second, the monster vanished. And in his place, just a son who got left behind. The next generation never knew Jimmy. But they felt him. Graffiti tags in alleyways. Unspoken rules in the West Side bars. A pause in conversation when certain names came up. They grew up in shadows cast by legends. And Jimmy? He became the kind of truth people don't check. A cautionary tale with a body count. Young hustlers talked about him like a ghost saint, half hero, half devil. But in secret, when the streets were quiet and the city stopped pretending it was clean, you could still feel his fingerprints on the bricks. As if he'd never left. As if he'd always be watching. Not to protect. Not to haunt. Just to remind them, the streets belong to the ones willing to lose everything. A rumor once surfaced in Chicago. A man matching Jimmy's description, older, quieter, but with the same dead eyes, was running guns through freight containers. The feds flew in. But by the time they arrived, the warehouse was empty. All they found was a single bullet casing and a rosary. Coonan's calling card, someone whispered. But no one filed charges. No one pursued. Because chasing ghosts only gets you silence and bodies. The man vanished into smoke, and so did the truth. All that remained were stories, like the one of a priest who never took confession, or the butcher shop freezer no one reopened, or the grave with no coffin. Jimmy didn't die. He dissolved, like blood in river water. There's a photo that surfaces every few years. Black and white, grainy, taken outside a diner in Nevada. An old man, weathered and alone, sipping coffee with a .38 tucked just beneath his coat. Some say it's Jimmy. Others say it's just a ghost that looks like him. But when you look into those eyes, sharp, empty, waiting, you feel it. Not fear, not awe, just the weight of silence. The kind that comes after too many screams. No one ever approaches him. No one ever speaks. Because deep down they know, some names aren't meant to be said out loud. Some stories aren't meant to end. And Jimmy Coonan's? That one's still being written in blood, brick and shadow.